Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
There's all kinds of opinions about where the value is in IoT. Well, a group that puts their money where their mouths are investors. This is a panel discussion where I interview two VCs with similar goals but different approaches. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Upal Basu and DeMesa about what they look for when making an Internet of Things investment.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation Internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is made possible by sales of my book, IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, and the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by completing the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com. That's www.iot-inc.com. So I do have a list of questions, but I think I want to start by, I sort of gave you a miniature introduction, but why don't you introduce yourselves and your perspective from an IoT point of view.
Okay. I'm DeMesa. I'm a principal partner at Momento Partners. We're a connected industry-focused investment, executive search, and advisory company. We work across the ecosystem. We started with early-stage companies doing investment, seed stage to Series A, also providing advisory capabilities. And then also we've advised and placed people at companies like Schneider Electric, Reliance, the company in India, the big Reliance. And so we've done a lot of placement advisory across the ecosystem. Me, myself, we like to bring IoT practitioners, people with real experience, into Momenta to differentiate ourselves as partners. So, for example, I was the CTO for GE Oil and Gas in San Ramon, the big GE headquarters for GE Digital, and I was with Siemens. I've done some industrial startups that got acquired, and so that kind of experience from large corporates all the way to startup early stage companies. I have been a techie by trade, CTO, but you learn really quickly it's not as much about the tech as you might imagine as an engineer. And so a lot of the experience is about go-to-market, about how do you actually, what's your business model, business strategy, and that's what we tend to advise and work with, both, interestingly enough, with large stage corporates that are in the industrial space that don't know anything about how to do business model transformation based on IoT enablement, I'll call it. Okay, so there's a lot of advisory help, whether I was in GE doing that as a CTO, or whether or not we do that now as Momento Partners, working across the ecosystem. And just briefly, we have 25 companies that we've invested in, of which 4 have exited. Probably the most recent is Plat.one, which was acquired by SAP as a platform, an IoT platform company, and the's only about 400 plus and counting every day. So who doesn't have a platform?
You guys won the lottery on that one.
Yeah, I guess we did win the lottery on that one. And some of our founders, for example, and our key principals were early stage ThingWorks guys. And they won the lottery. I wasn't there to win that lottery, but that was another one of the exits because we had invested in that company as well and had a principal there and a couple of others.
Okay. So my name is Upal Basu, and I'm a partner with Nokia Growth Partners, NGP. We are actually an independent fund, but we are backed by Nokia's capital. So we manage about $1 billion of Nokia's capital. And our most recent fund is actually the largest IoT fund, a $350 million fund, which we announced last year in Barcelona. So we are investing from that. And my background is I'm an engineer by training. So I worked in engineering for a while. There was a product manager in a software company called RMS, which was in the insurance software space. Then I was a strategy consultant at McKinsey for many years, and then I became an entrepreneur. Started a company called M4Mation Technologies, which was in mobile device management. It was the first one. So I was the founder CEO. Eventually was acquired by Alcatel, which not because of my planning eventually was acquired by Nokia, which eventually, and so a lot of my former colleagues in the book are now working in Bell Labs. So Nokia has an IoT platform called Impact, which is basically was built on the technology which I sort of founded in 2000. So I've been through the sort of journey of feature phones to smartphones, and smartphones now to IoT, and looking at, and also from 2G, 2.5, 3, 5, 4, and now 5. And I've seen these transformations are never linear. They tend to be erratic, but eventually they do happen and they do transform things. But what I found is the Silicon Valley the hype tends to get ahead of the budgets and the ability of especially in the business world, of customers to spend the money. And when the hype sort of dies down, real work actually begins. And literally this pattern has played out literally for the last 20 years since I've been watching new wireless technologies, and I expect the same with IoT. I think when the hype goes out, the real stuff will start happening. And so the main reason is enterprises have inertia, they have budgets, and over time they see the value, but the first reaction is always not to do anything till they're forced to do it. So new technologies take time to emerge, but eventually they become ubiquitous. So I believe that will happen with Internet of Things. My worry about the word IoT is a bit like big data and cloud computing and clean tech. It kind of means a lot to a few people, but to the average consumer or a business person who doesn't live in the valley, it means very little. And we need to think in terms of use cases and value propositions, rather than terms like IoT, cloud, big data, AI, machine learning, or whichever term you like. That's not, plastering that on your website is not going to get you much value. Ultimately, businesses buy because of a clear value proposition, and it's not because you are an IoT company, it's because you're solving some real problem they have. So that's kind of in a nutshell, my background.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, why don't you sit down? We're going to be a little bit lower, but take a seat. Jesse, do you mind sitting there, just so I can kind of look at you guys here? But I want to start with the hype, and everyone knows the numbers, right? Billions and trillions, so billions of things and trillions of dollars. I guess I want to first ask your opinion, and you're sort of getting there. That's why I thought it'd be a good a segue. Are we going to reach the billions of things, and are we going to reach the trillions of dollars? And I know it's kind of a loaded question, but Jesse, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's not. We're not getting
trying to establish market size over time at this point.
I think there's a huge opportunity. And now we've seen a lot of analyst data that says yes, we'll reach that. But putting that aside, since I also got to see it from the inside at GE, I mean, making a huge investment, and we're still not seeing, I think, literally that kind of impact yet in the market. The adoption's slower because a lot of the space is still fairly new. How do I apply the technology? What impact will it really have? People are they're moving away from kicking the tires. But I'd say that in the industrial space, which Momenta focuses on, there's clearly a lot around equipment reliability, service intervals. It's a given. Now, and I don't think GE just started when I started there now 4 years ago when I was at GE before. It was about cost out, driving the cost out of operations,
operational efficiency, asset utilization.
Clearly the big prize was about optimizing production, optimizing operations. I do think we'll see huge. The bigger bets are made not in the easy pedestrian stuff. I think it'll be in terms of transformative business models. Well, I don't know how to measure if that's in the trillions, but I think it will be very disruptive, but it won't be as
billions and trillions.
I think it's easy to say easily near the trillions. Yeah, I mean, GE sees already some impacts that are maybe approaching more of $1 billion within their own. When I was there, and that's growing. But I think that when you look at all of the large equipment devices in industrial operations, I think you see a lot of that impact. I mean, jet engines, airline efficiencies.
Okay, all right. Upal, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I generally don't like to make predictions, but I think the word trillion is used for economic value to society, not to the vendor. So I like to make that distinction. Society and consumers can benefit in billions and trillions. For example, healthcare spending in this country is, I think, 2 trillion already. So the word T is not the issue. The issue is how much of that flows back to, I guess a lot of you want to know how much of that flows back to entrepreneurs. That may not always be the same. Uber may be worth 50 billion, but they may also be losing a lot of money along the way. So My issue is, I think those semantics tend to get media attention, but they mean very little at the end of the day. So the way I look at it is, I think we need to parse IoT into segments and industries, and ask the question, which industries will move quickly? And I've been thinking about this a lot, and the older I get, the more I sort of try to simplify and go back to first principles. I think the fundamental thing we need to recognize about industries and corporations, a lot of you have worked with big companies, is inertia. The first law of motion, things remain in their existing state unless they're forced to move to a different state. And what causes that to happen? In my opinion, it's often fear or greed or some other factor which is externally motivated. And I bring this because I picked two industries where IoT is really moving more quickly than some industries. One is automobile. Now, automobile historically is one of the most highly inertia industries on the planet. If you have a car like a BMW or Ford, just changing the headlights took 6 years for these guys. Now suddenly these guys are becoming autonomous companies. Why is that? Did GM and Ford suddenly become young companies? No, the bottom line is they're afraid of Silicon Valley. The guy at the board at Ford and GM is telling them, if you don't change, Apple and Google and Tesla are going to destroy your industry, disrupt the heck out of you. That's the fear. Ford and GM are innovating out of fear. And to me, that's a very positive force. But if I'm an innovator right now selling into the connected car market, it's amazing. I'm going to get funded next week, right? The other one I pick is healthcare, right? Why is healthcare moving? Again, an industry which has no desire to move, high levels of inertia. Again, why? Because 20% of your GDP spending is ridiculous. The new government and the sort of just forces and the demographic, the fact you're all living longer, is just not going to sustain itself. So at some point, you're forced, the payer is forced to change, the insurance company, the payer, the provider, we all have to change to live our long lives and not go bankrupt, right? So again, some kind of a fear factor. Now, if you look at 1999, what drove innovation and high valuation? There was greed. It was not fear. It was greed. Hey, there's a big consumption happening. Let's spend money like crazy to catch up. Cisco started buying companies every second week. Nortel started buying companies. Nokia started buying companies. So I've seen the psychological aspect play off again and again. And I feel we should never underestimate that when we think of industries where we're playing. If I'm an entrepreneur, what I learned from my experience was it took a long time for my company to take off, but it eventually did, and it took off in a big way because I used to do device management and feature phones, and there was just absolutely no interest in managing feature phones. But when smartphones took off, people were like, oh my goodness, security, this, that, and suddenly the budget started opening up because smartphones were highly insecure, someone had to manage them, right? But I had to wait for 6 years for that event to take off. And so again, when the demand and the supply curve hit, it tends to be beautiful. But you need to understand the forces which drive that are often psychological, not technological. So that's kind of my sort of few points. So the answer is yes. When the pain becomes so acute or the fear becomes so significant that you cannot take that adoption, it will absolutely happen. And it may exceed those numbers. But my ability to predict that timing is not there. If I could, I would not be
sitting here.
Or I'd be doing something else.
Well, I think that I think Upal brings up a good point, and that is the first thing is to look at the projections. I mean, if anyone's built any financial projections like I have when I was a CEO, you know that all this stuff comes down to like just a couple variables at the bottom, right? And you just change those variables. It's like a house of cards. You just change those variables just a little bit, and everything changes. And you can reverse engineer that, and so forth. So the McKinsey study, I think, is the one you're referring to specifically with the trillions. They say, the economic value. But there are, Gartner's has them out, and others are looking at it in terms of market size. But I guess really where I'm asking is a lot of people here either have a startup, they're thinking of joining a startup, they're in a company, and the hype, it seems to me like, and I guess it's almost self-realizing the hype curve in a sense, because you identify it. I mean, IoT even has its own hype curve. It's not only at the top of last year's hype curve, it actually has its own. It spreads out like a spectrometer, and it has its own hype curve. From an investment point of view, though, is it hot for investing still? I mean, I guess, and I know you have to squint your eyes, and it's on a per industry by per industry. Is it still, or is AI? AI is now what I hear, more than anything now, and But is it still hot? Is it still hot from an investor's point of view?
I don't know. What we see when we do a lot of early stage investing, so we're still seeing a significant amount of deal flow or activity where we're vetting about 100 companies a quarter that are in the IoT space.
That are looking for money.
That are looking for money.
What about giving?
The investment side is still, I think it's leveled off from what we see.
Yeah.
It's not as much on what we see on the growth side, but it's not flat. I guess it's not going down. It seems to be leveling off.
Are you feeling the same way?
So again, I would say certain industries are getting a lot of capital, and so I think the word IoT, as I said, cloud computing, after a while, people will start funding problems, and entrepreneurs should solve problems, not IoT. And so people who are solving problems in healthcare are getting easily funded, on automobiles, trucking, very easy to get funded right now because there's this feeling that things are shifting in those, the tectonic shifts happening there. So capital is chasing those ideas. I would say in manufacturing there's a little bit of a lull. And the reason is that inertia question, why should a factory be retrofitted with all kinds of new stuff unless there's a external force pushing them? So there's a little bit of that. Now folks like Tom Siebel and Uptake and others have very high valuations, but Tom Siebel, because of his historical network, can probably push his way into the CIO office and get a few deals going. But I would say that high valuation, 1.4, probably is a very high multiple of whatever revenues he has. But if I'm a young entrepreneur, the manufacturing is tough place to start from. But I met some companies in Germany, for example, in countries where there's high costs, there's a need to reduce costs. If you think labor costs will go from $5 to $8 an hour to $15, it's going to force restaurants to automate a lot of their function. Similarly, robots come into play again when manpower becomes less and less available. So there are factors which are creeping in. I'm seeing more robots, but very specific use case robots being built for very, very tiny, narrow problems. I'm seeing those get funded too. So I would say people have become more narrow and less platformish in their approach. I think, as you said, 400 or counting. I saw 85 got funded, and I would say 79 of those will probably die. But so I think those platform stories are becoming problem-solving stories. That's the big shift. First generation was all these generic horizontal platforms. I think that's not the way to scale this industry.
Yeah, and I think, I want to bring up a couple things, but I think that's a good point when you look at the platform, and I think we have to differentiate between a platform and an ecosystem. The platform being the technical underpinning of how do we bring together multiple products to solve a problem, because people don't care about the Internet of Things at all. They just care what the result of it is. But the ecosystem, I think, is where I'm interested in from a business perspective. That's the counterpart, right? And I think if you look at each particular industry, it's going to be very difficult to have a platform that's going to be able to cover them all because the plumbing is the only, and even the plumbing, we've talked a little bit, we've heard OT, IT come up, the Operational Technology Network versus the Information Technology Network. It's still going to be very, very specific. And then when you start getting into the real, and I want to get into this next, the value, where's the value being created in IoT, a lot of that's in the analytics. And then that's also very domain specific. So we can cut this in a few different ways, but my next question is, where is the value being generated? And we've heard operational efficiency, that's one value generator. Asset optimization, we've heard that. What we haven't heard is innovation, innovating on existing products, invention, creating new ones. That's one way to slice it. Another way is looking at the technology. But Jesse, what's hot for you guys right now from an investment point of view? What are you looking at? And really my question is, where do you believe the value is being created?
I guess what we saw is until actually there was enough enablement of getting the data out of the sensors, the existing systems, the existing operational systems, the value couldn't easily be generated. Okay, that's why in the early days, still the communication networks, I'll call it the platforms, had to be put in place. Ultimately, I don't think many of those will survive because you can't have so many platforms. But then what happened is it really gets ultimately to the use cases, right? Where the value is driven. Of course, that's the early stage investments. Even ThingWorks, it's a platform, right? So, but ultimately, we see the value. Always believe the value is going to be driven from the data, the analytics, the insights from the data, and yet you had to put that in some context. in a vertical into a vertical industry, solving specific high value use cases. That's what interests us a lot. That's actually been interesting to us for a couple of years.
What is that?
Really a more vertically focused use case. Either the early stage companies are really enabling core use cases in a vertical industry, and a lot of that is around analytics. Okay, but it tends to be we aren't that interested in generic analytics plays.
Why would you?
Why would you? I mean, you've got, and it's just technology. It's ones that get applied in, say, smart buildings or in utilities.
Those are the secret recipes, right? I mean, that's where the real value is in these recipes. I mean, an analytics tool, and I'm sure there's experts here that know about it far more than I do. But these are platforms. So these are tools, but you need to give them recipes. You need to tell them what to do. You need to tell them what type of equations you're using to apply on it, and that all comes back down to the domain.
And ultimately, why because we do a lot of early stage investment, but why companies get invested in the follow-on rounds is when they prove their. Actually, I've been in startups too. Ultimately, you have to get the end, show the value through an end customer who then solves a high value problem. Say whether it's oil and gas production, energy management, and then the technology is just. It's under the covers, right?
So you're saying what's hot for you is focus on a very specific industry segment. So that implies to me domain experience, and then within that you're liking the analytics to. Is that a fair characterization or a fair summary?
It's sometimes a combination between the analytics and sometimes in some of the use cases. The data acquisition, the ability to acquire the data from the critical systems is
like oil and gas, for example, is.
I mean, so connecting to an oil well and doing that effectively has to be solved before you can slap some analytics on top.
Yeah, and you've said that a couple times now, which is interesting. And I didn't think about it that way, where the platform had a lot of interest early on because you had to get the data, right? You had to be able to grab it in the first place, and so it was natural. But now you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we're getting past that, so now the platform has to offer a little bit more. And
sometimes the platforms tended to allow people to not realize that the ability to unlock the value wasn't served yet because the underlying issue was getting the data out of the specific set of equipment or operational processes. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I won't speak for a certain company I might have been at before, but you could build a platform, but if you don't have the data that drives the insights, and then you can understand the patterns, what you have is a platform.
Right.
And maybe if you're a really big company, you can go and invest lots of billions of dollars in a platform and be somewhat successful. The early stage companies can't do that very successfully, in my view. Right?
No, I agree. And let's make sure we're calling them what they are. Platform equals middleware. Middleware, in this case, what we're talking about is plumbing. Right, so moving data from one place to another. Not that that's easy, because it's not. Not that that's not a hard problem, because it is. But if you think about it from a value perspective, there needs to be. I think, in my opinion, there needs to be a little bit more. Upal, what about you? What's hot for you? What are you looking at when you make an investment? How do you segment things?
Yeah. So I've already talked about industry. I'm not going to focus on that. But if you look at the history, I like analog. So if you look at cloud computing, SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, right? Most of the value has gone on either ends, right? It's mostly gone to the SaaS players who solve application problems, specifically targeted to a problem, and it's gone to folks like storage players and people who are building really high quality plumbing technologies. It hasn't really accrued meaningfully to the platform or the middleware players. And there are exceptions. MuleSoft is probably going to have a very nice IPO. But and companies which can tie, by the way, OT to IT,
I agree, yeah.
There's a huge business opportunity there. So people who can try bring silos which were never meant to be connected together, I think they can generate a lot of value. But generally, I would say, with that exception, I would say focus on solving customer problems or focusing on solving really hard technical problems literally at the chip level. So I bifurcate the world kind of that way. And, ultimately I think, the problem with being in Silicon Valley is we fall in love with terms and terminologies and technologies, but the market buys ROI, right? The one thing I learned in business is, I was actually talking to someone at Gartner, they said, we're not going to analyze this industry till there's at least 3 companies in this industry. I said, why? Because most large companies will need an RFP. They'll do proof of concept. Unless they can RFP you against somebody else, they're not going to spend $1 million. They cannot go back to their boss and saying this is the only company in business, because they'll say, well, why is my competitor not using it? So there has to be some maturity of the industry. There has to be other players in the industry. There have to be RFPs, the classic sort of things which happen in this industry. But I would say focus on ROI. To me, it's a business level conversation, right? That's the kind of stuff I'm looking at.
That's still pretty generic. ROI. So you're saying you're looking for a business that's making money. Is that all you're saying?
If you want real examples, right? So we backed a company called Retail Next, which is trying to help Amazon companies which are being Amazonized, right? Physical stores compete against retail, right? Right now, when you're on Amazon, you can track how you flow page to page, click to click. But when you go to a store, the store has no idea what you're doing there. Right. So they do heat maps and they can track where you are and figure out how to serve you better. So that means that leads to stickiness and better cost savings. In healthcare, there's a lot of innovation happening in IoT. The goal here is to avoid the insurance company doesn't want you to see the doctor every day, right? It's expensive. Even though you're covered, they'd rather use telemedicine and other technologies. If I can put a sensor on a diabetic's hand and have like a company called Livongo, which focuses just on seeing that the diabetics can look after themselves without ever going to the hospital, right? The ROI is tremendous because each visit to a doctor or hospital is very expensive, not only for society but for everybody else. So again, that's an ROI situation, right, where corporations increasingly self-insure. Most of the large companies we work for, by the way, are self-insured for health insurance. So corporates are actually buying these Livongo-like technologies and giving it to their employees. There's a company called Color Genomics, which is trying to do genetic mapping on people. They think if people know their genetic maps, they're going to look after themselves better than people who don't, right? So again, these are very simple ROI technologies which are being used for ROI. And the ROI here is dramatically trying to cut healthcare costs. So that's when I say, yeah, it is high level, but you can take 2 levels down and ask the question, how does this technology get me there?
We have a chatty group. Anyone want any question? Anyone want to ask any questions at this point? Josh, we'll take a couple and then we'll continue on. Otherwise, we'll get through that.
I guess it's more of an observation than a real question, but it seems like in the examples it'd be kind of interesting to see how you get to $1 billion, because disruptive technologies, take Uber, Facebook, I don't know, pick your driverless car example. Most of those technologies or most of those developments, and I agree with you, it's not technology, but most of those things were disruptive and came from outside the industry. If you try to put an ROI on it, you would have never ROI'd it. The stuff that ends up becoming ROIable tends to be, safe bets, right? And my question would be Nokia, for example. Nokia completely missed the smartphone market, right? Because they believed that the ROI probably wasn't going to be there. But then you end up being, the buggy whip manufacturer in a business school. So how do you get to these? When you look at these technologies or you look at these companies, how do we define something that is going to be disruptive versus something that is going to be ROI driven, right? Because
one is the enterprise versus consumer world, right? They're fundamentally different. All your examples I can see are consumer type examples. Uber, smartphones. But the moment I go to business buyers, they don't. Their inertia is very different, right? People's willingness to play with Snap is very different when you're 16-year-olds when you're a 200-year-old company, right? So I make a very key difference, right? So consumer, yes, there's a lot of imagination and creativity required to figure out, like a Steve Jobs did, is what would stick. And absolutely, a lot of companies miss that, and I think we will have those surprises. Nest was not that. Ring doorbell, is it? Maybe it is, I don't know. But my point is there might be other companies which will do that. One interesting thing about software is because there's no sensors involved, the virality of that is dramatically faster. Things can catch the imagination and have 10 million downloads overnight. You cannot download 10 million sensors overnight. So there's a natural break to this process. But I agree with you, consumer stuff, something will surprise us. But I was thinking when I was, my bias here was when I was talking about enterprises, right? Most of the largest companies in the United States are enterprise-centric companies, and the progress is more slow but more steady at the same time. So,
another question.
Sort of builds on that a little bit. It's if we break down ROI as being two buckets, right? One is return based on cost savings, and the other one's return based on new revenue. And it's easier to talk about cost savings in some cases because you can quantify that in death by Excel. But it's also much harder to make the case on the other piece. So my question to you guys is, the investments that you've made to date, when you looked at them talking about the enterprise ROI, how much has been focused on cost savings and how much has been on new business model, new revenue to their target customers? And do you see this as being more of a phased approach where the first generation of IoT success will be cost savings and the second generation will be those new business models that we've been talking about?
Revenue generating.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because there's still a lot of cases. The easier cases to make to enterprises, by the way, are cost savings. Yeah. I think it's very hard to, when you look at because we focus on the industrial space, so in that regard, it's very hard to tell an industrial company, although they get there can be disruption due to technology or to one of these tech-based startups that they're going to see huge disruption that's going to enable them to bring forward in their business. So a lot of the cases, even at GE, were made in other companies based on cost savings as the initial way to get in the door. However, the vision that's presented, that's kind of framed for those companies, is that I can do these initial use cases once I get in the door and show some basic case, maybe in a major upstream oil and gas production facility. I can drive out cost. Maybe I can do workforce optimization, right? Truck rolls in West Texas. And I can drive that down. Or maybe the ultimate play is optimization of oil and gas production. Right? But that's harder to prove.
So I actually think the biggest innovation is going to be revenue driven. And I was talking to Tim Chow from Stanford, and he was saying, like an MRI machine, the day machines become a service, you're going to have to expand the market by 10x. Right. And he was talking about MRI machines right now your hospitals have to have massive budgets, capex spending capabilities. Because of that, 90% of the world doesn't have enough MRI machines, and United States has too many of them. But if GE is thinking of making MRI as a service, they'll charge you based on number of MRI scans the doctor did. Suddenly, your market has expanded by 10x. And to me, the beauty of something sold as a service with a sensor attached to it means you can now you can become in the leasing business. I'll give you a real example. Philips has always sold this product called avionics for respiration around the world. They bought this company, allows people who have asthma. Now, if some of you been to India, India has a big pollution problem, right? But most Indians cannot buy an avionics Philips product, which costs thousands of dollars. So the first time in Philips history, they decided to offer respiration as a service. So you have to sign up for a 6-month contract. They give you the respirator with the person who comes and checks in once a week to see. Apparently fitting it is a very big part of this. And it's a brand new green landscape for them. So they've taken the same product, selling it as a service. It's an IoT play because the data from that, the breathing goes back to the sensor. So they know if they're not using it properly or they haven't used it for more than 3 days at a time, they'll go and call you saying, why aren't you using the service? And they've transformed a ventilator into a service model. And think of the opportunity in India that suddenly expands that to 50 million users who cannot afford a avionics product. So to me, that's the kind of stuff which gets me excited. Now it's very hard to find them, but cost saving, you're right, interesting. But at Philips, that's where they'll spend money if you can. And the entrepreneur opportunity is how do you monitor that ventilator remotely? How do you remotely update the software on that ventilator when something goes wrong with it? All kinds of exceptional handling requires technology. But look at that, simple service. The problem already exists, but you change the game. So that's my best definition of revenue growth.
Okay, so now we're getting a little bit closer. So we're talking about a couple things here, and I truly believe, and it's a big part of my work, is there's as much innovation to happen in business models as are in technology. Not that there's a lot of business model classes. In fact, I propose there's only 5. I want to go back to what you were saying, and I agree with both you guys, what you were saying earlier in terms of what I call the thin edge of the wedge. So one of my clients is GTI. GTI is a large system integrator. They're based out of Dallas, Texas. And we're doing a telematics product. And what we're finding is we're beating our heads against the wall for all these new concepts. We're going to be able to generate this much money. And what it was is really simple. We're going to put a camera at the back for shrinkage, because in the back of the trailer, somehow stuff goes missing. Now, what we come up with that I've now been using with pretty much all my clients is what I call the thin edge of the wedge. And that is, who's going to be writing these checks? Who has the budget? These are the bean counters, right? You can't present to them these newfangled ideas, because initially, until there's a relationship with you, you have to interface with them in a way that they understand. The way they understand what's really easy, the way they've been using IT for all these years, is efficiency. It's squeezing a little bit more out of what they have. So what we do is we go in, we sell them something that's really cheap. In this telematics example, is $5,000 per truck, and we didn't. All it was doing was the camera, and then but what we did is we put a few extra sensors in there. We stored the data, and now we're coming up to 1 year's time. Now our strategy is going to be open up our, we've done what we said, thin edge of the wedge. We've sold from an operational, so that is the ROI is going to be on the cost, the bottom line. Then we open up our jacket, we go, look what we have if you want. It's a service. This service, because of data analytics, we can now sell you that you can do X, Y, and Z. In this case, it's going to be for driver, it's for efficiency costs in terms of driver. But we've been tracking all this time at our cost, not theirs, something that we can sell from an incremental point of view, and this is a service. So it's now, we sold a one-off, they bought it the way they know how. They bought it, it's $5,000 per truck, that's it. And it's a service, so the business model, they understand. The service is just getting more efficiency. Then we present them with an information product that's now on a per monthly basis, and they can that. So we'll see if that works. But that's kind of the approach that I'm seeing. And you have to just think about where the market is today. It's still IoT, and Upal's point here is like in the valley here. We're talking IoT. IT, people get IT. There's only one letter different, right? And so can we use IoT to do that, that type of operational efficiency as well? And I think we can. And in fact, what we're seeing now, GE being one of the companies, they say, you can squeeze 1 or 2% out of this, we can. Now, IT over all these years, we're getting down to like squeezing out less than 1%. Now, they can still be pretty big numbers, but IoT has the possibility to squeeze out a lot more. So I think that's the approach that, it depends on the situation, but that's a good approach. Go in with the operational efficiency, with a business model that they understand, collect data, analyze that data, and then hopefully have something new to sell them later. Another question?
I actually concur with your comments. In the engagements we have had, my observation has been that there is always an insertion story which is tailored to the decision maker, right? But there are a whole bunch of adjacencies you get, because Upal, I fully agree. In fact, my entire company is based on busting silos, which not too many are talking about, because the Honeywells, GE, Schneiders, and others of the world, they are selling siloed solutions and making tens of billions of dollars. So if you're talking to an operational guy, revenue generation is not on his point. So you tell the operation story. So in the deals we have won, and we're still a young company, the insertion was energy management, right? It was like, we will save $300,000 from your peak demand management. Give us a chance, and you see what we can do, right? Then soon they said they liked what we had, but why should they buy something else for surveillance? We actually can support modality of videos, so they were happy with that. So we started getting that, and in this case it was a supermarket. And then they said, POS is a separate database. I'm manually creating what to buy the next day. And I told them we can easily automate. So you do get these adjacencies, but the insertion, I think we have to be very clear as startups, just to build a replicable business model. Otherwise, these types of VCs won't talk to you, right? So, and it's for our own good to build the discipline. And so that's what I've been observing. And to a question for you guys is, the market is still too fragmented. Right? No platform is dominant. So, and how do you explain to companies like us, right? We cannot build on top of any platform because there are too many fragmented ones. And the architecture, sometimes they insist on their own edge agent, their own cloud. So I think the normalization and the interoperability part, I don't think the IoT vendors are taking good care of. What do you think of that?
Well, one way to look at it, I think, is it's one thing to put, in this specific context, put all your eggs in one basket, bet on a major someone who's trying to be a major platform player. Pick your favorite major, pick C3 IoT, pick GE, pick a few others in the industrial space. I say that might be, if that's a good vehicle to get to your customer market, but you solve a specific value proposition use case, that might be your best vehicle to get to market, as long as you don't bet all your eggs on that platform. Now, the problem can be a bit of, you have to do some work to integrate to that platform. Should you do that just straight on Amazon or straight in Azure? I think the issue is that don't lock yourself up into, unless you really feel you want to bet on one of these platforms as the winner, which I don't think it's clear-cut at all. Then you basically solve a specific industry problem. You look for adjacencies, because your solution may still give you adjacencies where you don't have to be a platform player. You'd hate to also have to build a platform yourself. So I'd say, basically pick on a few that may give you access to a market, because they're doing a ton of marketing, they have a ton of market visibility, and then look at, the same thing's happening whether you're even a GE or other companies. You might say, I'm going to build my solution on Azure and Amazon, as an example, right?
If they're asking you to build on top of an on-prem technology, which is 20 years old, I would not take that business even if it paid you money, because you'll never be able to scale as a company with that kind of approach. You could be a consulting company and do projects again and again, but if you wanted to be a venture-backed company, for example, there are industry standard platforms as Epic and Cerner for health record management, but generally, if you're having to customize to a very unique energy management Honeywell tool, I would be very nervous about putting your cards on that kind of a business.
But that's tough, right? Because this is, the platform we're talking.
Consulting business model.
That is,
scalable software.
And it's not where you want to be.
They're just looking for savings.
But Jesse brought up something, and I think you need to tease it apart. There's cloud platforms, and then there's platforms, right? And a platform really is going to include more than a cloud. I mean, if you want to if you want to show your product is solving a particular industry, getting a certain ROI, maybe you do just go to a cloud, operator, make it work on there. But when you start getting into platforms, then it is very specific, because the standardization hasn't happened yet. So you are having to write. So it's really a challenge for a smaller company to pick. Now, when I would look at it more from the ecosystem point of view, as opposed to the platform point of view. And I think you were kind of getting it. It's like, what customers can they provide access to? Yeah, I mean, what are they going to put behind it? What's the business model and so forth? But it's really tough, right, guys? I mean, because it's so fragmented, there's no standardization. And we can just go to a cloud. You can go to Azure, you can go to Amazon, you can go to Google, but that's not really a platform. That's a cloud. And a platform is you got to get further down from the cloud. You got to get into first the IT network, and then you got to get into the OT network. That's a platform. And so we need to find, but that's the problem is now, because of the OT dimension, it's going to be very much on an industry by industry basis. So you're having to roll. How do you get around it? How do you get around that conundrum? Because you're having to roll the dice, aren't you? Or is there a better approach?
When I was in the feature phone world, we had 250 operating systems before Android came along. We actually had a lab in Bangalore which actually tested and customized the device management for 200 different devices. Yeah. And we ran through $50 million of venture capital doing so. And when the market took off, mobile lines and the AirWatches came along, copied a lot of our ideas. All I'll say is it was a humbling experience to working with different systems, because eventually standards do follow. Industry actually is forced to adopt standards because they realize that they're suffering the pain themselves. Vodafone Telefonica eventually figured out that they needed a standard called 3GPP, OMA, DM, whatever. And the problem is initially they're not receptive to that idea because they want you to do that custom type of work. But eventually the pain becomes acute enough. The problem is, as an entrepreneur, you don't want to get into that business unless you can self-fund that business. If that customer is willing to pay you enough to do that kind of one-time integrations, then perhaps you can rationalize it. But if they're not covering your costs, it's not worth the...
But it's taking your time, right? And you're not contributing to your intellectual property by doing that type of work. Maybe you're keeping the lights on, and I guess, in some circumstances...
Waiting for that day to come when things take off.
Yeah. Question? Yeah.
Well, question, comment. A couple of things. The platform, when we say platform, I think in the definition of platform there is an inherent meaning or inference of commonality. So broad market. The platform is designed and defined and developed for broad market. Do it once and then reach out to as many people as you can. So by this definition, you would not be able to cater to those niche applications or verticals or that sliver high value application that you're going to get your ROI from by just banking on a platform. You're always going to have to attach some other value to it so that you can generate your ROI, or you can. So in this sense, platforms should be interchangeable. Maybe I guess that's the point that you were making.
Well, that's the interoperability issue, but it's not yet, and that's where we are.
Correct.
Right? I mean, we're at a point where
we all need to keep that in mind. I mean, these platforms are going to be interchangeable.
They will and they won't be. I mean, I think if you look at the smart, Upal just brought up Android. If you're developing now for smartphones, you've got an Android platform, you've got an iOS platform. Not so bad. But I don't think that's going to happen in IoT. Specifically what we were saying earlier is because there is going to be some consolidation, but it still has to be on a vertical industry by industry basis. So that seems like a bit of a conundrum there, isn't it? Or what do you guys think?
Well, Bruce, what you said, I mean, those are ecosystem plays. I mean, really, if one were to bet on a platform, I think one's betting on someone who's going to drive an ecosystem.
Right.
Not just the platform that says, I have a development type of platform catered to some specific vertical or industry. Those aren't very interesting to us. I mean, it's like, so ultimately we look at, if someone has a platform, usually early stage companies that have platforms aren't very interesting. I mean, so it tends to be they enable something, maybe they have domain experience in transportation, connected car. It's kind of like, okay, use your platform, develop a connected car set of high value applications, and then we can talk. Otherwise, it's not that interesting.
What about something that's been intriguing me more lately has been the open source platform, Android, right? Open source. It seems to me that could be a potential way where the industry goes. And there are a few open source platforms that are there. It's for everyone to build upon. That seems to me less risky. If we're looking at it from a risk mitigation point of view. Do you guys have any views on open source in IoT, where it's at, and what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this company got funded yesterday called Confluent. I don't know if you know, it's Apache Kafka. It's open source. You can download Apache Kafka yourself, but they provide all the sort of support and all that, like Hadoop and Hortonworks did. And in big data, no one talks about proprietary data sets. No. Everyone has adopted Hadoop underlying technologies, and most of it is open source. And people are now building apps. But if you look at it, value has, again, it's gone to the app guys. Very few of those Hadoop guys have actually made a lot of money. They created the market, but didn't monetize the market. And I see that here, by the way. But I do see the big difference is healthcare versus auto. The standards and the platforms are going to be very different. Latency requirements are going to be different for energy versus two cars going next to each other. Very different millisecond type latencies. So the platform for the auto industry, which Ford, GM, and others will eventually sponsor, will have very different characteristics. But I think the one thing people learned from Microsoft in the 90s is the holdup created by a proprietary platform is enormously expensive and painful. So at the lowest layer of the industry, generally, I think large companies will resist proprietary company platforms. And C3 IoTs of the world, they may do well in oil and gas, but for them to become ubiquitous, proprietary, I'm skeptical. I think they'll become more of an app-centric company eventually. But the lower levels, I think people have learned in the last 30 years in IT that you don't want single companies to control the code. And I think eventually hope is there, but it'll take time.
Josh, you had a question?
Yeah, maybe taking us up a level, and there are a lot of IoT investments that have been made in a lot of IoT companies that have actually already become Internet of Bullshit rather than Internet of Things. From your perspective as investors, are there lessons that you have learned as investors in the IoT to avoid some of the bullshit IoT propositions that we see?
Well, I mean, I think that if anyone says if anyone puts the word AI and machine learning and platform on their cover, just run as quickly as you can, because they are buzzword compliant. And the problem is the first generation of IT was they got into the hype, and I'm sure 90% will fail. There's a few good companies which will clearly emerge because they'll pivot. They had enough capital to make some mistakes and get out of it. The ones who didn't have enough capital probably will not make it, or they'll become consulting companies at the end of the day. So, I'm very tired. I mean, entrepreneurs don't do it, in my opinion, the word bullshit kind of says that they were taking advantage of the situation. They were not. I think they were genuinely interested to make a change. They were naive. And, as you get older, you become less naive.
I think that's it. The ones who, there's a lot of smart tech people, especially in the Valley, right? So the challenge is that we're all in the Valley. I'm a technical guy by trade, and you learn really quickly. You have to solve a specific customer problem. The ones who don't understand fundamentally or won't accept the help that says you really need to focus on solving specific industry problems are the ones we run away from, right? It takes something very special to say there's a tech play that is so unique. There are a few out there, right? They solve a very difficult technical problem, and they may be worth investing, but those are typically few and far between.
So you're saying then you're not investing in the technology, you're investing in?
Well, the technology may be an enabler, right? But they're very specifically looking at a repeatable set of business problems, or let's say use cases that can be solved, or set of use cases that can be solved. It very much, many times, there are technology-oriented plays.
I've come to the conclusion that technology has become acqui-hires. The people who crack it, like Tom Siebel, with no technology in his DNA, really has go-to-market all over, right? And ultimately, if you look at companies which go IPO, they have cracked go-to-market. And if you realize as an entrepreneur that you don't have that, and Cisco offers you $50 million, sell.
Okay, we're winding down, but we have another question back here.
So my question is slightly different. I think there are a lot of investors that invest in what they think is a good idea from their perspective. There is ROI perspective, there is a revenue capture perspective, and so on. But I think bottom line is that in the IoT, I've been following this industry for quite a while, and it sounds to me like there needs to be solid use cases. And that's a partnership, and I think you alluded to that, both of you have said that. There needs to be solid partnership between entrepreneurs, technologists. All of this platform stuff is kind of clouding the issue in my mind, because it already exists. It's already been done. So the idea of partnering with entrepreneurs, technologists, and companies, followed by some investors, like the big pocket investors. Is that happening around here? Because that's what I'm interested in. Because I think that's going to be the success thing. And the model is Google Uber model. I mean, if it wasn't for Google, it wouldn't have happened. And so that's the kind of chemistry that will be disrupted.
So what's your question?
The question is, are there any forums, are there any deals that there's three-way partnership type of things that are happening? And how do I find out about those? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting, because actually when I I'll take industrials. Industrials realize that they have a lot of innovation internally and or externally that they want to harness. I guess the transformations that are happening uniquely with IoT driven right now are so early stage that they need to kind of engage with that earlier than they're used to. They're used to typically investing in Series B, vetting something that already has a large revenue. But the partnerships are happening there between the business development side of the house, ideally the businesses within those large industrial corporations with entrepreneurs. And we try to actually connect those because we see that opportunity. Because it is, if you can get the strategics behind you who are willing to back an idea at earlier stage, which are kind of slowly realizing they need to, and they don't have the innovation capability, okay? Fear is driving some of this because they're fearful that a lot of things about servicing their equipment, making tons of money off of, or profits off of selling spare parts, servicing their own equipment because somehow they have special sauce because they made the equipment. They're fearful of the IBMs of the world or actually the earlier stage technology that's coming out. So they want to partner with those early stage innovators. They want to unlock some of the innovation they have inside that never finds the light of day inside these large corporations because they have the innovator's dilemma. So we're seeing some of this form, at least in one respect, because we're working with large corporates.
No, but corporate incubators is kind of like military intelligence.
No, I realize that.
And everybody and their brothers formed a corporate incubator.
Well, that's true.
And we're living in an open world, right? And they're using those technologies as well. But I think there's a serious opportunity, in my opinion. And I don't have any data to prove it substantially. But I think the technology already exists. What we're looking for in IoT is use cases and partnership. And a partnership between the venture capitalists that they do see the opportunity in that, the entrepreneurs that do have the technology to make it happen, and the third one is the companies. But pick any industry, healthcare industry, car, looking for all kinds of stuff, but we can't connect with them.
But this is the corporate incubator is a good model. Earlier I was going to say, this is the purpose of an ecosystem, but an ecosystem is not, generally they're not far enough along. So the next best thing is these corporate incubators, but there's more than just corporate incubators. I mean, where we used to do our meetup, Plug and Play, for example. This is an area where the big corporates come in, they have lots of deal flow. I have my cubicle there, which I never use. Lots of small companies are there. So there are these type. I think it makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's an indicator of how early we are in the market. But that's kind of what you're talking about, isn't it?
No. Actually, I think I'm way past that. I'm pretty sure you realize yourself some of the really big use cases that can be implemented. Now,
okay.
Those are the ones.
So let me bring up another one then. So the Industrial Internet Consortium, they're a client of mine as well. The Industrial Internet Consortium, look them up. What they do is they base everything on use cases. So they call them test beds. And so they have different test beds, and it's exactly, now that you bring it up, is exactly what you're saying. They have a large corporate partner, which is a customer. They then bring together the IBMs, the bigger companies, and then they bring together the smaller companies, which basically plug the holes, the technology gaps that they don't have, and they build an actual solution. What they're really doing is building a de facto solution. So I think what you're talking about are these consortia, associations, and that has a play too. Because, and I think they're there almost because the standardization hasn't happened at the technical level, and sometimes what you have to do is do de facto standards, and this might be kind of what you're looking for. All right, one last question, and I think we're done. We have the microphone somewhere. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I have a two-part question. Part A, because you don't let me do the second question. So So, two-part questions. Part A is, is it a coincidence both of you are focusing on the industrial IoT and not the consumer IoT? And also heard that more people invest on industrial, not consumer. So that's A. And for those opportunities that you have invested in, what kind and range of ROIs did you look at or did you bet on?
Right. So it's not by choice. We do have a consumer focus, and we have investments in China. In consumer, I think the problem we found with consumer investing is people have to buy hardware. It's not. I cannot give it away for free like Snap and Google and make it up through advertising revenues or some other model. So adoption curves for hardware are harder. That was the thing we learned. You cannot give watches away for free or Fitbit away for free. Even a Fitbit. And the biggest adopters of consumer technology, if you look at the history, have been people who are really on the younger side, don't have a lot of money to spend. So when you start at $200 for a watch or something, you kind of slow down adoption. Nest is a luxury product. So I think that's been one learning we've had, is it's tough, but it can be done. And that's why Amazon Echoes have the ability to subsidize their little buttons and give it away practically for free. And a venture-backed company would have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to give hardware away for free. That's been a learning for us. Doesn't mean we're not looking. We have been looking at sprinklers, thermometers, all kinds of stuff. But what we found was scaling, and the kind of spending you need to do to make sensors effectively free is tough. So we keep on looking. There's no reason for that. And the second question, ROI. I think the ROI to us is really, when we invest at our stage, ROIs are not very clear. The problem statement is clear. So the assumption is, if you solve this problem well, the ROI will be high. And hopefully that is true, but sometimes that's not true. But the nature of the problem, like interoperability, that's a huge problem. If you can crack it, there's a value. So there's a little bit of a hope in that answer there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's hope in that as well. So we look for repeatability of the solution in certain industry segments. So we kind of have an opinion on certain use cases that can be repeated. I mean, if I look at maybe around equipment reliability, okay, or certain things like that, but we look for things that can be repeated. Maybe it's proven in the power industry, but we can easily see adjacencies in oil and gas or other industries. Of course, we want the early stage company to focus on one vertical and have some domain expertise. We don't want them to literally sell everybody and say, I can solve any machine problem across any industry, because it's not very easy to do. You have to have some domain experience. We picked industrial IoT. I think that was by choice of our company's investment thesis, and our company focuses purely on industrial IoT. I think it's, in some sense, it may not have the big, billion-dollar, true billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar valuations, but in industrial, I think because it's so difficult, we can kind of better assess how differentiated the solution is, or the technology is, in unlocking these use cases, because it's not just there's some things that are just easier for us to predict from our background in the industrial space, in terms of because they're hard problems, okay. And so, in that sense, it's more predictable, and there's not many people or early stage technology companies that appreciate how difficult that problem is.
And I just want to add just a little bit. The consumer space is difficult because, as Upal has said, you can't just put it on your website and have people download it. And this takes us back, I think, to business model innovation. Right now, if you look at a consumer device, it generally costs about 10x. You buy a lock for $19, you buy a smart lock for $190. You buy a thermostat for $24, you buy a smart thermostat for $240. The reason is the business model that the consumer wants to pay is a one and done. And until you start looking at, August Lock, for example, is now looking at the insurers and maybe offsetting their costs by selling PII with agreed upon PII to offset it. So that's an area of business model innovation. So in the industrial space, they're wide open to ROIs. They're wide open to different business models because they're looking at it from a P&L point of view, as opposed to a consumer. It's not so much P&L, right? It's I just want to buy something and I don't want to have to keep paying for it. So I think, in my view, the consumer space is a big opportunity, but I think it's business model innovation that still has to be cracked, and business is more open to different types of business models because they're businesses, right?
Well, the ventilator example I gave you, right? That's a consumer play. We had a company called Whistle for dogs, dog collar. It's amazing how much people are willing to know that their dog is within a geofenced area. They're willing to pay $20 a month just to know if the dog's not running away from. So there's a real model there, right? And Mars bought that company, Pet Care. So.
Yeah, no, there's definitely chances. All right, everyone, please give our panelists a hand. Okay, that was a good discussion with Upal and Jesse. This podcast goes vertical, deep diving into different topics each week. If you prefer a more horizontal and structured approach to learning IoT business and its orbiting technologies, check out my book IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, or become a certified IoT professional by completing the ICIP training and certification program. For details, just go to www.iot-inc.com. Also go to www.iot-inc.com for an analysis of this episode, links to things that were mentioned during the episode, and very importantly, the episode's PDF transcript. Just search for the name of the episode or the guest. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every week's episode delivered straight to your device. Or, if you've been listening for a while, there are 3 ways you can support the show. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click to leave a rating, a little bit longer to leave a review. You can share it on social. I'm on LinkedIn, to a lesser extent on Twitter. And of course, you can support this show by buying my book, IoT Inc., or the ICIP training and certification program. It's how I pay the bills. Next week's episode is A Good Bed, Sensible Shoes, and the Art of the IoT Pivot with Philip Renegade. I hope you can join me then. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Till next week, may your path to IoT business be a reasonable one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.